Hello and welcome back to another video. This one is about the OSD. Now, I don't have the microcontroller yet, but I might have jumped the gun a little bit and made a design for a write once, read many format, also known as a worm format. And I think the design is clever, so I wanted to share it. So this video is going to be organized into some chapters: how the disk gets made, how it works, and also how the stampers are made. So anyways, here it is. So how the data actually works is it will store data with two distinct states: the timing pulse and the data spots. Now every single thing on the disk is known as a spot, and a spot can either be a timing pulse or a data spot. Now how the data is structured on the disk is a timing pulse and then a data spot, and that repeats over and over. Now these timing pulses can be written to, and they don't store any data. Well, that's technically not true, but I'm not going to get into that right now. And the reason that why the timing pulses are even there is so that the player knows when the next bit is going to happen. That way it doesn't have to have any clocks to tell it that, hey, well, it's been precisely half a microsecond, so that obviously must mean that we're going to get the next bit, because that's just not reliable. I mean, for computers, it usually is. But with the hardware level that I'm going to be working at, no. The problem with using the timing pulse is you basically waste half the disk on something that doesn't really store any meaningful data. But I think it's kind of necessary, as of, well, I don't really know how else you're going to be able to determine the next bit. Another thing is it stores binary data, but also the timing pulse. So how does that work? Well, it stores ternary signals on the disk, where 0 represents 0, 1 represents the timing pulse, and 2 represents a 1. Now, how it stores this on the disk is with two different materials: copper and tin. Now, the reason why I chose those two seemingly unrelated elements is because, look at them. Copper is a reddish orange and tin is a silver. That's a pretty different color from the copper. And sure enough, these two different materials represent the timing pulse and the data spot. Wait, that means one of those materials has to be able to represent both states of the data spot. How does that work? Well, it operates off of what I think is the most clever part of this writable disk: the tin. Now, this stores two different states through different forms of reflection: spectral reflection and diffuse reflection. Now, the two terms mean different types of reflection, and spectral reflection is something reflecting things like a mirror. Now, that's not exactly how it's defined, but it'll give you a good understanding of what that means. And diffuse reflection is something scattering light, so it doesn't act like a mirror. And what this means is if we have a laser shining onto the disk, it can actually use the received amplitude to differentiate between the three different states. Now, I think this is already pretty clever, but why did I choose tin and copper? Well, the biggest reason I chose them is tin's low melting point, and the copper's far different color and melting point compared to tin. Now, the tin stores the data. We know that. But how do we write to it? Well, this is the most awesome part of this entire thing. So what happens is, when writing to the disk, it will turn on the laser at a tin section, and then turn off. Because of tin's such low melting point, the tin will melt at the surface. And then as soon as the laser shuts off, it will immediately cool. And as it immediately cools, the surface of the tin will go from spectral reflection to diffuse reflection. This causes us to successfully write a 0 onto the disk. Anyways, next up, how the disk is made. So how this beautiful optical media would be made is through a combination of stamping, pouring, grinding, polishing, and love. So step by step, what happens is first a copper-coated disk is stamped with a special stamper. Now, what happens here is the copper layer, because of how thin it is, and because we're also using a stamper, the stamper is able to engrave a pattern into it. Now, the pattern determines where tin and copper end up on the finalized disk. Wherever copper got pushed down, that's where tin will be on the final disk. Wherever copper is spared from this pressingly pressed state is where copper will end up on the final disk. And after the pattern has been stamped, molten tin gets poured on the disk. This will fill in all the indentations in the disk, with tin. Then, once that's done, a little bit of grinding is done. What this does is it removes the vast majority of the tin, exposing the copper. In fact, it will most likely grind a little bit into the copper. Then finally, polishing is done. This will make everything nice and shiny, but it'll also make sure that all of the tin is polished, making sure that the entire disc, by default, is spectral reflection. And now finally, how the stampers are made. First, start out with an aluminum disc, then apply photoresist, and then after that, use a laser to engrave a little bit into the photoresist. Because the laser is able to burn it away, or is it melt, evaporate? But either way, it's able to remove some of the photoresist at any spots. Unlike how traditional photolithography is done with masks and diffuse and other things that go right over my head, this is done by having some little small lenses on voice coils which slowly scan across the entire disc. This might be very slow, but there are benefits to this that I will explain in a different video. After that's done, an acid is put on the disc. But before the acid chomps away at too much of the disc, distilled water is washed over the entire disc to remove any of the remaining acid. Then finally, the laser sweeps across the entire disc one more time, removing any of the photoresist that just so happened to remain. And then, you now have a usable stamper. And that's how the OSD-WO, or worm, disc is made and works. I think that some of the techniques I used here are very interesting and clever, but there might be problems with it. I am not a chemistry expert in the slightest, so if any of you might know a little bit about this, please feel to make corrections or suggestions. Anyways, that's going to be all for today. Thank you for watching, and also if you want to see more of this content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll know whenever I upload one of my videos once in a blue moon. Anyways, goodbye, and thanks for watching.